I'm Adrienne Enns, and I welcome you to the Intention Sessions podcast. I want to inspire our most intentional living. In each episode, we'll talk to remarkable individuals who will share their authentic journeys and their insights with us. They're going to remind us that life's complexities can be our greatest teachers, and that intentional living can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. I hope you find some inspiration for your most intentional life right here. Today on the podcast, I have the incredible Corene Lavhan. Corene is host of a podcast and YouTube channel called Mommy Hour. She started building her platform 3 years into motherhood, realizing that the key to healing is sharing journeys with each other. Each story of transparency comforts other moms and puts a stop to feeling alone in the world that judges mothers so harshly. Corene believes that it is important to continue to have a dialogue that will heal and inspire moms to be the very best versions of themselves. I met Corene, it was last year, only it seems like a lot longer, in Los Angeles, and we just connected. I feel like we have this virtual friendship. And when I was thinking about creating this podcast, which was last summer, you were always on the list, and I was just thinking about this morning as I was preparing for this, because you describe yourself as a mommy advocate. And I just really wanted to dive into what that means, because as a new mom, when I was a new mom, 13 years ago, I could have really used an advocate because I was not a good advocate for myself. But having said that, since that time, when I'm creating these ideas, we've had, a pandemic and racial issues have come to the forefront. And you and I have just been having a conversation about, how we're just questioning everything. And so I just feel like we've got a lot to talk about. So we're just going to see what needs to be said today. How does that sound?
It sounds good.
Good.
Sounds good.
Well, one thing that I do want to start with the mommy advocacy, just because that is the seed of this.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love in the work that you do is it's not just talking to moms, it's talking to everybody who impacts moms. And I would love for you to tell us, why moms need an advocate, why they need these conversations, and what inspired you.
Yeah, that was a beautiful introduction, Adrienne.
You're a beautiful person.
Oh, thank you. So my journey with becoming who I am today, and when I say that very loosely, because I just feel like it's always evolving. But I decided to start a podcast when my youngest son was sick. He was in the hospital. He had RSV and pneumonia, and it forced me to become a stay-at-home mom. And once I became a stay-at-home mom, I was lugging two little boys around to story time and all these different activities during the day. And I met moms throughout the day and, at different events and stuff. And they were diarrhea at the mouth with things that they were experiencing that they didn't have anybody to talk to about. And the through line with meeting all of these women was that there's no one supporting and listening to them. And so I gave myself the mommy advocate name because when I started talking to these moms and once I started interviewing them for the podcast, these interviews would be hours. I mean, the podcast that I would upload would probably be about 45 minutes. But some of these moms, I was talking to them for 4 or 5 hours. And it really made it very clear that we are not advocating for ourselves, which is why when we talk to other people, it's we can't stop talking. We can't stop looking for resources. And we don't have people who are advocating for us. So even if we do have just an ounce of strength in us to advocate for ourselves, like we're not advocating for each other. And so as a mommy advocate, I think it's very important to encourage moms and give moms the power to do whatever they need to do to help them on their motherhood journey. And I think that that's not something that happens all the time, and it's kind of foreign, which is why I have no problem being that person and letting moms know whatever it is that you need is okay, because this is your motherhood journey.
I love it. And I'm just reminded of, when I went to, some of those groups as a new mom. And I mean, I formed friendships, but at the same time, sometimes there was more competition than there was support, or you just felt like, am I doing this wrong? Like, why do we do that?
I really think, and I talk to, my mom group all the time, and I say this all the time. I don't feel like our parents' generation, like the mothers before us, it was just autopilot. There was no checking in with each other. There was no, like, they were doing things just because that was what you did. There was no other way to do it. And so I feel like with with motherhood now, it just looks so different. Like there's therapy, there's all these different resources to help us get through the journey and get through these moments. But I think that's new. So everything was like a secret. Like you didn't share your tools with other people. You didn't share your resources with other people. And so when you're not sharing things with other people, you're competing with them because you're not sharing them because you feel like it's just for you. And I don't feel like motherhood has to be that way. It doesn't have to be this secret tribe of people that's only sharing everything for themselves, because that's selfish. And it just doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a competition. It doesn't have to. I don't have to look at my sister and see her struggling and not offer the same resources that someone offered me a couple of days ago. But it has become this thing, and especially with women, there's already competition with women, and so you throw motherhood in there, and that there's just this additional layer of trying to do our best in front of other people, but we're suffering in silence, trying to reach that goal.
So how do the women, I'm based on all the conversations you've had and all of these, you know, really great heart to hearts, what do they what can they do to stop suffering in silence?
Talk,
Yeah.
talk to each other. We and I remember when I started the podcast, and I remember once I even became a mom and just sharing these thoughts that I never thought that I would have, sharing the thought with one of my very closest friends, Shannon, that, I really just want to leave my child on the couch and just go to Target. I know my husband isn't here, but I really just, I just want to leave him on the couch and go to Target. Of course, that's something that I can't do and something that I did not do. But we have these thoughts that make us feel like monsters. And we have these thoughts that make us feel so isolated. But when you just open your mouth and talk to the mother next to you, or talk to some other mother that you've just met, or a longtime friend who's a mother, you realize that we're all experiencing this motherhood journey together. We may be on different chapters, we may be in different lanes, but if you talk to other moms, you will see that it is literally the same language. We're just experiencing it and speaking it at different times.
It's so true. I feel like anytime we're alone, we just think, oh, it's only happening to us and everybody has things figured out, which once you start talking, you're like, we're all learning as we
Hmm.
go.
Hmm. Absolutely.
There's one thing I want to share with you, and I'd love to hear what you have to think about it. But I was speaking to a mom's group a while ago, and I was, sharing my May You Know Joy work, and we are talking about joy. And then, one mom really stood out to me because she said, just like you're saying, she's like, all I want is some free time. I just need a break.
Hmm.
But then when she gets a break, she just doesn't even know what to do. She doesn't know what brings her joy. Do you know what I mean? Because she's
Mhm.
become so disconnected from herself. And I just think this is such an interesting conversation for us to have.
You know, I really feel like that is a common theme with mothers because we are naturally givers as women, and because our day, depending on the age of your child or children, our day is really revolved around other people from the time that we wake up into the time that we go to sleep. And so I think that once you become a mom, if you do not have, if you are not already rooted in self, like strongly rooted in self, where you have your hobbies, you have the things that you like to do, you know what makes you happy, you know what brings you joy. If you are not strongly rooted in that, you're easily compromised once you put on the hat of a mother. And so I feel like it's inevitable for us to not know what makes us happy if we didn't know that before we became a mom. And even if we did know that before we became a mom, sometimes it still is room for there to be some kind of shift and for you to morph into this other person where what made me happy a couple of years ago doesn't make me happy now. So that's why I think it's so important to continuously ask yourself what makes you happy. Make a list of the things that make you happy and not be so comfortable with being the person that you've always been. Be okay with surrendering to the differences within yourself and the changes that may come with you going through life and realizing that there's other things that can make you happy, or realizing that whatever made you happy doesn't make you happy anymore. So I think that's where some of the uncomfortableness comes from and the isolation comes from, because there is a lot of growth that can happen with being a mother. And when you don't fully commit to that, and when you think that there's something wrong with you, when you don't have the answers in the moment, it leaves you completely vulnerable, and it leaves you in this space of questioning yourself when we should always be questioning ourselves. Questioning ourselves is not a bad thing, but I think that we are so used to having the answers and so used to always having a rebuttal that sometimes we can just sit in it and be okay with whatever comes from that moment. We're not going to always be able to make ourselves happy from the things that used to bring us joy. So redefining ourselves, redefining our happiness, and being okay with like changing is so beautiful. But I think that it makes us uncomfortable, so we just don't surrender to the moment of change.
I agree. And I just feel like it's like dropping this. I had to drop the, any straggling ideas of perfectionism a
Oh.
long time ago. And I felt so much freer when I did. So my kids are sometimes like, wow, like we're scared of you when you're mad. And I'm like, well, I can be mad and you can be mad. Like, and we can work through our feelings, or I cannot know the answer. Like, I think when they see us also, show up authentically, but also trying to figure things out and navigating with them, it's so much healthier.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's something that I have given up this whole idea that my kids can't see me in the process.
Hmm.
It's I think that's why I was so mad at my mother when I became a mom, because I'm like, you shielded me from who you were, and it's almost as if she didn't humanize herself.
Yes.
And so I didn't think that it was normal to humanize myself in front of my children. But showing our children that we go through a process in everything that we do makes it okay for them to think that they don't have to do it perfectly, because mommy didn't do it perfectly, daddy didn't do it perfectly. And if you're paying attention, you'll realize that nobody is doing things perfectly. I always think about Oprah when she started her network. She fumbled so many times, and she's made it very, very clear how many times she's fumbled with like the content and all these things. This is Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
And so, whoever would have thought that after 25 years of having a very successful show, that she would fumble when she tried to do something different? But she did.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, like when you shift and when you move differently and when you try different things, there are going to be so many fumbles, but those fumbles are you discovering different things about yourself and different things about the process. And so I think it's so important to include your kids in those moments, because it just keeps us connected to the human experience and the normalcy of what we go through in the human experience.
I love it. And I wish I had heard this. Yeah, like 15 years ago. And I also think, just being open to my kids are just a little bit older than yours, but like who they are as people, like when I really pause and really listen to what they're saying and feeling and going through, I learn so much from them. They're teaching me.
Mm, yeah, I will be completely honest and say that this pandemic has made me pay attention to my kids even more.
That was my next question. So, yeah, let's talk about pandemic parenting.
Yeah, yeah, it has made me pay attention to them even more because we are my oldest, Ellington, is 5 and he's starting school this fall. We were homeschooling him. And then I decided within the last week that we're going to send him to regular school. And so with us being home all the time, even before the pandemic, it's great to be at home. But I feel like when you're kind of like on autopilot with things that you need to do, you got to do your workbook work. You got to do this, you got to do that. All these things to keep your kids on track. It kind of like disconnects you from your kids because you're just connected to the process of what they need to do to get to the next thing. And so I feel like this pandemic has slowed all of us down, and it slowed me down to the point where I'm really paying attention to what they're saying now. And even though this 5-year old may be having a meltdown and he may be having a moment, this moment is really big for him.
Mm-hmm.
So it may not be big to me because I'm 35 years old, but to a 5-year old, this is a very, very important moment that he can't express himself the way that he wants to express himself, or that mommy isn't hearing him the way that he really wants me to hear him. And that's important. And
Yeah.
I really want to continue to listen to my kids and let them know that their voice is very, very important. And no matter what, as their mother, even though I may not always get it on the first try, or I may not always understand exactly what you're saying, there's always room for dialogue and communication so that we can always try to understand each other better.
I absolutely agree. Like, and yeah, it has been such a time for like slowing down, getting back to basics, getting to really know these kids. And I also just have to believe that what you were describing, like really hearing him at this, young age, will influence, well, your whole relationship and so much more moving forward because he's like, I have her attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other day, my 5-year old told me, he said, "Mommy, your phone is more important than your family." And he has no clue that when I'm on my phone, I'm uploading stuff for different documents that I'm sending to my church, or I'm doing so many different things. I'm texting my sister. All of our family is on the East Coast. I'm texting my dad, but to him, I just look distracted. And so I've really, and he's told me that several times, and thankfully I'm not vegging out on my phone looking on social media, but I really am a lot of times like talking to family members and doing different things. But he really made me pause, because it made me think, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It doesn't matter what my intentions are. The way that you are perceived to other people, especially your children, is very important. Yeah, like I think that I have to listen to him, and he has to listen to me. Well, both of my boys, but yeah, it's just important for us to listen to each other. And that's a two-way street. I'm not a part of the mindset that kids should talk, and we shouldn't listen, or we shouldn't listen to what they're saying. They're just kids. No, they're humans who are going through an experience the same as you. They're going through the same human experience that you went through. So don't discredit what they feel and how they're expressing themselves, and how life is affecting them and how you're affecting them. Like, we can't discredit that, because they continue to help us evolve if we listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know lots of moms struggled during the pandemic because, yeah, it was family time, 24/7. So, how did you navigate that in like as healthy a way as you could?
I we are such busybodies because we're homeschoolers up until this fall, but we're homeschoolers. But the joke that I always say with my other homeschooling moms is that homeschoolers are never at home. So the pandemic for us really, really required a major shift into what we needed to do in order to give us that same balance. And so it made me, like I said, it made me connect to my boys more. It made me connect to my husband more, because without us being on the same page, at this point, my husband is, in his office working. And so we have to work together to make sure that, like, the boys are staying quiet while he's on this conference call with 100 other people, or like, we have to make sure that we're staying connected in that way. And I have to one of the major shifts for me was consistency on my end. Consistency with feeding myself, spiritually, mentally, just with everything, making sure that I'm fed first, because there is no way for me to maintain my sanity, maintain my health, maintain any kind of stability mentally if I am not feeding into myself first. And that's what you posted something today, and I was just like, oh my goodness, it's so important to have that time with yourself before you start mothering for the day. And you may not get it
Hmm.
every day.
Yep.
You may not get it every day, and some days it's just 1 minute while you're literally using the bathroom and brushing your teeth. But it's important to recognize yourself and acknowledge yourself before you start the day and take care of everybody else. You have to acknowledge yourself and see yourself first. And that's not something that I was consistently doing. I was doing things like getting up and working out and doing all these things, but I wasn't literally like looking in the mirror and saying good morning. You know, your intention cards have made me more consistent too.
I'm
Because
so happy about that.
I mean, literally, like, when we started the pandemic, my husband started grabbing a card. And that just brought me so much joy, because we all need that right now. Like, we all need just something that is just keeping us connected and grounded right now. So, I'm always grateful to you. But that's part of our process now, because we have to be connected to ourselves before we're able to connect to other people and take care of other people. Like, it all begins with self. And I know we've heard that for so long, and it's so cliche sometimes hearing it, but it's one of the simplest things that we've heard for so long, but it's very, very true. When you're not connected with yourself, nothing goes right. Nothing. It's all chaos.
I totally agree with you, Will. And I create this material because I was so disconnected and on
Mm-hmm.
autopilot and just, yeah, just trying to please everybody else, and took a very brutal downward spiral in the process. And I feel sometimes now like there's this idea like, oh, I've got to, meditate for half an hour, like have some
Mm-hmm.
very elevated practice. But to your point, whether it's a card or just going for a walk or listening to a song you love, like 1 minute every day, it's more the consistency of practicing that grounding that adds up. Like it doesn't have to be fancy, but
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be grounding and bring you joy.
Yes. Yes. I think we really underestimate those things that bring you, like how those joyful moments affect you for the rest of the day. I got into the habit of when we get into the car, like the boys listen to their playlist. And I recently I've stopped only playing their music in the car because your music doesn't always bring me joy.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's so important to keep a joyful list. Like just keep a list of things that bring you joy because sometimes we forget. But if you write it down and and um and always have something to look to and erase it, scratch it out, like that'll just keep you grounded and connected to yourself and connected to your joy. Because everybody else's joy, it doesn't mean that that's gonna be your joy. So it's important to connect to your joy and know that no one else can make you joyful. Like that's your job.
It's so true. And to your point, it can be layered into everything you do, like layered into your morning, like smiling at yourself in the bathroom mirror, or yeah, you're driving your kids somewhere, like turn on some great music. Like it doesn't have to be like a 1 week vacation once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And we went on a vacation. We went on a cruise this past fall, and I'm so happy that we did before all of this stuff happened.
Yeah.
But we were at a point where, we don't live around a lot of family, and even though we have family here, our family, people who we made our family, but we don't have like the grandmother around the corner that we can drop off, where we can drop off our kids, or like we just don't have that. And so my husband and I, we were talking last fall, and we were just like, what can we do that can make us happy right now? Like, what can we do? Like, we've just kind of been on autopilot. Like, what can we do just for us? Not thinking of anybody else. What can we do for us? And so we end up going on a cruise together. And it was one of those moments where we were like, it was big, and yeah, it was, a vacation or whatever, but we were just like, this is bringing us joy. Like this is what we need to like bring us joy in this season right now. So I think it can be as small as you picking out a different lipstick, or you picking out your favorite song, to you going on a cruise around the world. Like the joy is endless when you choose joy consistently.
Totally. And sometimes to your point too, like it's not just like the time that you're on the cruise. Cause I just think too, my kids and I did this great vacation together last year, but we had fun like planning it months ahead, and then we had fun while we were there. And then afterwards we're like, oh, let's try these recipes or make a photo book. So like it has like extended
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
far.
Yeah, it's so many layers to it, because even and I remember you going on that vacation, even when you went on the vacation, it's like once you get there, you still have to decide to look at the positive and see the joyful moments. Because even when you go on vacation, there's a lot of moments that aren't joyful. Like sometimes going on the hours flight, the 8 hour flight to get overseas, there's people on there that probably aren't that joyful, or probably
Yes.
probably
Or
aren't
like
the
being
best
in
people.
transit. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a constant thing that you have to be in tune with in order to really find happiness on a consistent basis. It's a constant thing. It's not just like, oh, I did that, and I smiled at myself in the mirror and now that's it. No, you have to continuously look for those moments throughout your day to keep you lifted, to keep you grounded, to keep you centered. Like it is a continual thing.
You're so right. You're so right. And I want to ask, I'm going to shift the question a little bit, but I'm curious too, like for, the parents listening, they're going to be listening to this, well, and whoever else is listening, like at the end of the summer, what are you thinking about? What are you intentionally doing like to shift your kids into this September, whatever that looks like, period?
Mhm. Uh, so the reason why we decided to send Ellington to mainstream school is for the consistency that the school will provide. And with me having Parker, which is my 3-year old, with knowing that I still have to entertain him while Ellington is on his Zoom classes and all that stuff, I figured it would be great for him to be connected in that way. He can just be in his world with all the things that are happening with the Zoom calls and all that stuff, and then I can kind of like entertain Parker over here. And so I'm trying to get them in the habit of just going with the flow and being
Hmm.
consistent. Um, because if anything that this time has taught me and taught the boys is that we just have to adapt. We really have to adapt. And sometimes we are not going to have all the answers. Like we're just not. And I think as a mom, we always want to have the answers for our kids. We always want to make sure that we are giving them the full picture before we start something. And sometimes we can, but in this moment, we're just not able to do that. Even me talking to the school, like they don't know what they're doing. They really don't.
What can change every day, right? We've seen that.
It can change every day. And we really want to have a lot of expectation and have high expectation for the people who are making the decisions, but no one knows what is happening. No one knows what it's really going to look like because we just haven't experienced anything like this before. And so for me, it's really just about just letting them know that some things may change, and we're really just going to try and just go with it, surrender to whatever this process is going to be like, and know that one thing that's been really comforting for me is knowing that everybody around me is experiencing the same thing. All of
Hmm.
my sister, like all of us are going to be virtually learning. And this time during the pandemic starting in March, it really did force me to buckle down on how I homeschool. And so I think that this was kind of like the prerequisites for what we're going to experience in the fall, because I wasn't as structured as I am now. And I'm so it's just this whole time has just it I mean, when I say it has shifted my focus, it's shifted my unrealistic expectations for myself. Like it's just shifted everything, and it's humbled me in a lot of ways, because like I said, as moms, we always think that we have the answers. We always think that we um that we can figure it out, and most times we can, but sometimes you just have to be honest with yourself and just know that like you may eventually figure it out, but it's going to take time. And I think that that is what this year is going to be about. It's going to be all about new norms and adjusting to what that means, because we don't even know what that means yet. So yeah, it's this year is all about surrendering for me and the boys.
I totally agree. Like, and I love your word, adapting, because I mean, we're always adapting. Well, we should be. Maybe we
Hmm.
weren't, but now we're forced to.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just know, like, my son, for example, likes to know what's going on, like, what about this? What about this? And yeah, sometimes I just have to say to him, like, I don't know. Like, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm trying to figure out. So knowing that we're not ignoring it, like we're giving it all this consideration, but we're just gonna have to see. And all we can do is prepare ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is a prime example of what we were talking about before, when it's like you have to sometimes let your kids in on the process and let them know that, like, it's just not like we're just not going to always know. And that's okay.
Yeah. What do you feel like? I don't know quite how to word this, but what would you say is like what feels like your biggest challenge right now as a person who's a mom to two young boys?
Mm. Um, so I have to be very I have to be very, very specific with this answer, because mothering Black boys is very different.
Yes.
Um, and so my biggest challenge right now is accepting the reality,
Mhm.
and accepting it really is me just accepting the fact that I really, really hoped and prayed that by the time that I had children, that I wouldn't be saying the same things that my grandmother was saying to my father and his brothers, in regards to the things that they need to do in a world where majority of people don't like them for the color of their skin. And my biggest challenge is just accepting the fact that 57 years later, my father is 57. 57 years later, I'm still having to communicate the same things.
Yeah.
um, that has been very, very, very difficult for me. Very depressing for me, honestly.
Yeah.
Since George Floyd and George Floyd's murder was very, very pivotal for me. And I shared this with you before. I snapped on someone on social media. It was a very, very, very pivotal moment for me, um, because it was a reality that I never wanted to face, and it was something that it was just too much. It was too much. Watching the murder of George Floyd was literally, I felt like I was watching the murder of my husband and my two boys.
Yeah.
And so that's a very different it's a very different feeling when you already know that you're different because you're African American, because you're Black. But to see people being so heartless with your life is different. I think one of the pros of the civil rights movement before, in the 60s, is that we didn't get to see everything. And so now we get to see everything. I can show my boys the murder of George Floyd. I can show them. I can show them this white man putting his knee in his neck. I can show him that. But the advantage that I think, like, my father's generation had, is that they didn't have to see it. And so it's so heavy now, because not only are you experiencing the oppression, not only are you hearing about these things, not only are you having to equip your boys with the knowledge of these things, but you also can show them these things. And so it is very heavy. It is very, very heavy for uh, mothers of Black children right now, because um, we're living in a time that we've never experienced before. And you can say that you've experienced racism before. You can say all these things, but I don't think that there's too many people that can realistically say that they've ever experienced it to this magnitude. I mean,
Yeah.
this has been eye-opening and heartbreaking, and empowering in a lot of ways. Um, John Lewis passed away last night, which is a very, very,
Saw that.
yeah, very, very prominent civil rights leader in our community. And so it's something about his passing that gave me just a little bit more hope. But the reality is that we still have to fight. He's been fighting for so long. He was
Yeah.
80. And so yeah, I was just talking to my husband last night and just saying how, we have to be more active in the community, and we have to my father had me and my siblings in so many different programs, so many different enriching programs. And so that's just something that we have to do going forward. We have to make sure that our boys are equipped and make sure that they're educated with, the tools that they need to walk through a world that demeans them, oppresses them, and they do it with purpose. Like it is intentional. So, it's a different way of parenting when you are consistently trying to think of ways to make sure your boys stay alive. It's a different pressure. It's a different way of parenting. And it really is heartbreaking. It really is. It's made me question if I want to have another child. It's made me question a lot of things because it's heavy. And as much as I love being a mother, as much as parenting brings me a lot of joy, you also have to be very, as a Black mom, you have to be very, very realistic about the reality of what it means to put that weight on you.
How do you, and I don't know if there is an answer to this question, so you tell me, but like with this heaviness and heartbreak, how do you, where do you start to navigate through that? Or not start, I guess, but like when it's so heavy, how do you navigate?
I think for so long I have not had to navigate through it because I grew up in Cleveland. I grew up in a predominantly Black um, area, and then we eventually moved to a predominantly white area. But my family and everybody all grew up in predominantly Black areas, so that was the norm for me. I grew up in predominantly Black schools, so for a long time, I didn't really experience like direct racism. Like I kind of like, it could happen to me, and I probably just would have thought that some people were just being rude or not being their best selves. Um, and it wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles, California, where it was a melting pot, and everybody did not receive Black people the same way. So I have to be completely honest. I did not really, 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 really like notice it and like acknowledge what exactly was happening until I moved to Los Angeles. And so
Mm-hmm.
this reality for me is different because my husband grew up completely opposite. He grew up in a predominantly white area for his entire life, and then he went to where we both went to college, Howard University, which is a historically Black college. So we have polar opposite experiences. And so for me, I've had to sit in this reality of what it is, and not turn my head on it, and not discredit what everybody else has experienced up until this point. Because just because I didn't experience being called a nigger in high school, there are so many people around me that did. And so for me, this time has really shown me that the Black experience particularly when it comes to racism, is extremely vast. Like it is so vast. I mean, you have people that were called niggers every day in school, and then you have people that didn't experience any of that, like me. And so it creates this this thing of like, yeah, it's just a different reality. Yeah, it's just a different reality. And so it prompts a lot of dialogue. It has recently prompted a lot of dialogue that has just reflect on the way that I want to parent. It's um made me reflect on the things that I want my boys to be involved in. It's just really made me face it head on and not dismiss any of it, because my experience was one thing, but my boys may have a very different experience, and we don't know. But what has given me the confidence is the fact that no matter what their experience will be, my husband still, like, we still have to equip them with how to navigate through this world. And with us having polar opposite experiences, my husband and I feel like I feel confident that we can totally do that, because I've also come to terms with there's some topics that I probably won't be able to handle. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay for me to handle the things that I can handle, and for my husband to handle the things that he can handle. And with the two of us, I feel like they will be equipped and knowledgeable enough to navigate.
Yeah.
There's so many things happening in the moment, at this moment in time, and honestly, there's no way for you not to be fear. I can't speak for anyone else. There's no way for me not to have some fear, in regards to just the way that people treat Black boys. And I really just want to make sure that my boys are very informed and not walking through this world with only fear, but just educated about the way that people will possibly treat them.
And how do you do that?
I think that is that
I know.
is
A big question.
yeah, my husband grew up in a predominantly white area, and I grew up in a predominantly Black area. So my reality is completely different from my husband's reality. So I pick up on things a lot easier than he does, because in a lot of ways it's been his norm for so long. So for me, it's like a shock to the system with a lot of things that happen race wise. So I feel like us having a balance and us kind of mixing our two worlds together will we will raise fearless, educated Black boys who are confident with going through this chaotic world. And it is a challenge, but it is something that I'm even more confident about, considering the experiences that both my husband and I have.
And I want to ask you, like, well, I have two kids
Mhm.
and they're a little bit older than yours. Like, they're 13 and 15. Like, so if we were like you and your husband and your boys and my kids and me, like, we were all sitting around, like, what would you also want my kids to know? Like, what do they need to know? And what can they do to be, part of changing all of this?
I think that is so important for I think it's so important to teach them to be fearless as well, because in a lot of ways they have to stand up to the differences as well. They have to stand up to the cops who want to arrest my boys for doing the same thing that your kids may do. If we have fearless white children that are standing up to the discrimination and the prejudice that happens towards Black people and Black children, that is the start of the change. Because I said this on a another podcast a few weeks ago. Nothing is going to happen to your children. Nothing is going to happen to your children. And that's not to say that nothing will happen every single time, but most likely, if my son is standing next to your boy, nothing is going to happen to your boy if a cop has to intervene with something. So I think that it's important for white families to know that you have to educate your children as well. White families have the privilege of not speaking about race, and that is the problem. Not speaking about race gives society the upper hand in teaching your children about race. And society is going to teach your children that people who do not look like them, Black families, Hispanic families, that they're thugs, that they're everything but something good. So if white families are educating their children early on about race, as uncomfortable as it may be, because for the most part, from what I've been told from my white friends, the conversation is not being had. And that is the problem, because we cannot afford to let society manipulate our children's young minds and manipulate them into thinking that the way that it already is okay. And they have the power to change as well.
Yeah, and I think, of that generation, like they're compassionate and they're open-minded.
Mhm.
And I just think that they have potential to do so many incredible things. So that's the thing. As our eyes get opened more, it's just like, how can we do better so that they can even be way better?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the only way to do that is to educate them and teach them, what it looks like. 'Cause another thing that I've really realized is that they may not be able to pinpoint it either, because it's the norm for them as well. So yeah, we have to educate everyone. We have to diversify our friend circle. If families who are not Black or Hispanic don't have Black or Hispanic or another race of friends, that's a problem. That's a problem. So we have to teach everyone of this next generation that it is okay to have friends and people around you that look completely different than you. I think that's the beauty of this world.
I totally agree. So, what would be it may sound like an obvious question, but I want you to give voice to it. Is what would your biggest hope be for this next generation?
Oh my goodness. Uh, I have so many things that I'm hopeful for, but I'm also realistic, and
Hmm.
I know that this thing that we're dealing with right now in this time is not ending with our generation. So for the next generation, I it just keeps coming up. I just want them to be continue to be fearless enough to challenge it. Don't just watch it happen. Don't just watch someone that you know or not know. I think sometimes we are so connected just with the people that we know, but there are people that are at the grocery store, or the microaggressions when it comes to racism is so evident and it's so consistent that you can always step in. And so I just want the next generation to not be fearless of the change that is happening. And as John Lewis said, he's known for saying, John Lewis just passed away. He's a congressman who is the forefront of so much change that has happened. And one thing that he said that he's known for saying is that, getting into good trouble is good. Getting into good trouble that is changing the world is something that we all should be okay with doing. So I think the next generation, my father always told me that if you ever go to jail, this was his way of scaring his children. If you ever go to jail, you cannot call me for to bail you out because you got yourself there, and that is something that I don't support. But if I were to call my dad and tell him that I'm in jail for protesting and all these things that we are still doing today in 2020, I know that my dad would support me in that moment. So if we get into good trouble, that's the recipe for change.
So beautifully said. Corene, I just want to thank you so much. I hate to stop this because I feel like I could talk to you for days and weeks and months, but this has been incredible. And I know it's giving people lots of seeds of inspiration to just really start and keep going with their own change. So how can they, follow your work, keep up with you? Where is the best place for them to access you?
Yes. So I am on Instagram. So I am at Corene, that's Corene .Lavhan, Lavhan. And then my podcast, Mommy Hour, is on Spotify. It's also on iTunes. So I'm mostly active on Instagram, and that's where everybody can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. May some of the wisdom shared here inspire your most intentional living. For more information about this episode, this podcast, intentional living, and my work in the world, please visit mayyouknowjoy.com. You can also find my May You Know Joy and Seeds of Intention cards there, and my book, Intentional Days. You'll also find details for the Intentional Days membership, where you can gain access to a thriving community of intentional souls and lots of regular inspiration. I've got you covered. Until next time, I wish you great joy and many intentional days.